So in today's video, I am going to be discussing if the Cincinnati Bengals can make it back to the Super Bowl. Now, before we get into the video, please consider liking and subscribing, and let's jump right into the video. So with the NFL free agency and all the signings that teams are making, there's certain teams that kind of has sparked my interest during this offseason, and it kind of made me interested to discuss them. It makes me want to discuss what they did last year and to see how much more they can improve and see if they can at least get back to the level that they were the year before. And that's what it was with the Cincinnati Bengals, because the Bengals obviously just made it to the Super Bowl, losing in the Super Bowl to the Los Angeles Rams. But with all the moves that the Bengals have been making, it really did spark the question in my eyes, will the Bengals make it back to the Super Bowl? So in this video, I will be discussing that. So if I give my quick answer on if the Bengals will make it back to the Super Bowl, I can't say it's a solid yes or no. If I'm personally leaning one way, I'm leaning no. We know how hard it is to even get to the Super Bowl, but to make it back to the Super Bowl, even after a loss, that's going to be really hard. The last team to make it to back-to-back was obviously the Chiefs. But even for them, it was hard to win back-to-back Super Bowls. You know how they played against the Buccaneers back in 2020. The Chiefs got absolutely steamrolled by the Buccaneers, and it was not good for the Chiefs, even after they made it to back-to-back Super Bowls. So for the Bengals, I think it's going to be a very tough road for them to get back to the Super Bowl. Let's first look at their division. First, we'll start with the Steelers. The Steelers are a team that you can always rely on to be consistently good and consistently making noise. Like last year, they made the playoffs, and it looked like they had a quarterback that was 3 years past retirement. Like Big Ben shouldn't have been playing, and they still made the playoffs, albeit they got destroyed by the Chiefs in the playoff game. But they still made the playoffs. And then you look at the Browns. They were able to upgrade at quarterback. So the Browns, as tough as they were, the past couple of years, past 3 years, they're still going to be a tough team, I think, especially with adding Deshaun Watson. So they're a team, although they're kind of in, it feels like a dysfunctional phase right now, they're still a team that's going to be tough to compete with every single week. And then you look at the Ravens, and then you have, like, the Ravens, there is absolutely zero reason to doubt that the Ravens won't be good next season. What happened to the Ravens last year is a complete anomaly, and I don't think something like that might ever happen again. The Ravens literally lost every single starter on their team. Lamar Jackson was injured at time. They lost both of their running backs before the season even started. They were playing a JV level secondary, it felt like at times, because of all the injuries that they sustained throughout the entire season. They missed the playoffs, but I have zero doubts. I'm pretty sure the Ravens are going to be just as tough, if not tougher, than they have been in, obviously from last year, because last year I don't buy the Ravens aren't going to be injured that bad next year. Like there is zero doubts in my mind. I think the Ravens are going to be just as good in this division. So when it comes to a divisional standpoint for the Bengals, they have a very tough division to go through, and it's not going to be a cakewalk. And even last year, that division kind of was back and forth all year long. It really looked like at times nobody really wanted to win the division. It was tough last year because every team was neck and neck all year last year. And I fully expect the division to be neck and neck again this year. But then you look at the conference. The conference as a whole just seems to constantly be getting better. Because let's first look at an individual team, Buffalo. Buffalo is a team that I think literally their kryptonite is the Kansas City Chiefs in the playoffs right now. I have zero doubts. Buffalo is going to be an amazing team next season. I really, truly do believe that the Buffalo Bills are currently probably the top favorite in the AFC, in my personal opinion, to make it to the Super Bowl out of the AFC. Now, it's early. It is now April, so we're still very early on in the offseason. Obviously, we still have the draft. We have OTA. We still have everything to go on. But the Buffalo Bills are a tough team to try to compete with. You have the entire AFC West. Now, for the Bengals' sake, to get into the playoffs, this might be helpful for them because you're going to have the entire AFC West beating on each other all season long. So you can almost chalk up that one of those teams, maybe two of those teams in the AFC West are going to miss the playoffs just because they're going to be beating up each other so much. And the division is so tough in the AFC West. In a way, it might benefit the rest of the conference because they're like, hey, those guys are beating each other up. We got to handle our business against, I guess, lesser quality opponents and, make a statement and make a push into the playoffs. So they have that going for them, that the AFC West might be beating up each other, but the conference as a whole, when they play those teams, it's going to be very tough. Like all four of those teams, in my opinion, right now are all viable contenders to at least make the playoffs. And then you just have other teams like New England. As weird as New England has been recently, you can't ever count out New England, even though they haven't made very many moves. And then Miami, who knows what noise Miami can make in the AFC. The AFC is just loaded with talent, and it's going to be a dogfight, I think, all season long. The AFC as a conference, I wouldn't be surprised if the most wins a team has in that entire conference is 11 wins. Like, that's how tough it is. But let's look at the Bengals side of things. Let's look at the moves, and the moves have been particularly on the offensive line, because you look at a playoff run. Some people say you don't want to overreact to a playoff run, and I completely understand that. But when you're making the playoffs and you're deep making a playoff run, the flaws that you have as a team are not only out there in the public light because, everybody's watching those games. They come out and you see those flaws much more vividly. You can see the flaws because, the Bengals can play the Jets one week. I know they lost to them last week, but that's just an example. You'll see that they struggled, but it's like, okay, they played the Jets, they played them close. Nobody's going to really talk about that game. But you look at what happened in Joe Burrow in these playoffs. He was sacked 19 times. So you could see the major flaws in the Bengals and this team because, they're playing the top talent in the NFL. Joe Burrow was constantly getting hit. Like, you're playing better defenses, you're playing better teams in the playoffs, and you're seeing the major flaw that the Bengals had, and that was their offensive line, which I think they did a tremendous job of upgrading and addressing this offseason. They signed Alex Kappa. They got Ted Karras, La'el Collins, and just as a little side note, they got Hayden Hurst, who replaces CJ Uzomah, who signed with the Jets. But the major moves that the Bengals have been making were to the biggest issue that the team had, which was their offensive line. So with those moving forward, let's look at some positives for the Bengals. As I said, they just rebuilt their entire offensive line, something that they desperately needed. They took the Chiefs model, rebuilt the offensive line, and now Joe Burrow's going to have protection. You saw the plays Joe Burrow made without an offensive line. And people were questioning the Bengals for taking Jamar Chase instead of an offensive lineman. And to be honest, that worked out perfectly well for them because Joe Burrow, the fact that he was making all those plays, even without protection, he was still getting the ball out to Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins. Like, they were still able to make plays. And the offensive line, while it was a problem, it didn't seem to hinder Joe Burrow because he will constantly take hits. Yes, Joe Burrow takes some really bad sacks, but Joe Burrow was still standing in the pocket, taking the hits, and still delivering the football. So now I just think this is just going to elevate Joe Burrow's game even further than what he can do. Like, what Joe Burrow did without an offensive line was already impressive enough. Now you give him an offensive line, I think great things are destined for the Bengals. And then another thing for the Bengals, they have a really good defense. Like, their defense doesn't have to be anything special. It doesn't have to be, a defense that's lighting up the NFL. They have enough talent on offense that I think in a way that the offense can carry a team. Like, I think they did it last year. Now, the defense in the playoffs is what really carried the Bengals because you look at their 3 playoff wins. You had the late interception against the Raiders. They picked off Ryan Tannehill 3 times, and then they played a flawless second half against the Kansas City Chiefs, forcing a turnover in overtime, and were able to win that game. So they have a good enough defense right there that I think they can make a deep push into the playoffs. Because you look at their defense that they have now, they have Sam Hubbard, DJ Reader, Trey Hendrickson. So they have a great defensive line, and they got Jesse Bates back in their secondary. So the defense as a whole, I think, is not an issue for the Cincinnati Bengals. Like I said, it doesn't have to light up the NFL. And as a franchise, you have to be happy about that. Your defense can produce and do good things for you, even when your offense, which the offense for the Bengals wasn't clicking as great as we thought they would in the playoffs, but their defense, we know now, can do great things. And now that you've given Joe Burrow an offensive line, I think the Bengals have more than plenty of good going for this team that they can still make a push for the Super Bowl. But then you go to the negatives or the ways that they might not make it back to the Super Bowl. They're in a very tough division. Like, I would argue that they're maybe in the third toughest, maybe the second toughest division of all of football. You have the AFC West, the NFC West, and then you have the AFC North. Those 3 divisions right there are the 3 toughest division in football right now, and I don't even think it's particularly close. I don't think any other division holds a candle to what those 3 conferences have, or those 3 divisions have, when it comes to talent and the amount of experience, everything that those teams can do. I don't think and I don't think any other division can compete with those 3. So they're in a very tough division. Again, like I said, the Ravens are healthy now. The Steelers with Mike Tomlin as a head coach, never having a losing season. They're always going to be competitive. You never can count them out. And then you have the Browns. They got an upgrade at quarterback. Now, I think the Browns are the weakest team in their division, but I don't think that the Browns are going to be that team that's going, 3-14, losing a whole bunch of games. I still think the Browns, even with the dysfunction that they have, their ceiling is still probably 8 wins. So the Browns are going to be a tough team. And just as I said, the entire conference is a is a dogfight. It's going to be tough. And then you also have the aspect of how hard it is just to get back to the playoffs and get back to the Super Bowl. They have a tough road ahead of them. It's going to be a long season for all these teams in the AFC, and it's going to be hard to get back to the Super Bowl. I felt like a lot of things went the Bengals' way in this recent playoff run, how they handled their business against the Raiders, what they did to Ryan Tannehill, how they played against the Chiefs. And then in the Super Bowl, their offensive line got really exposed, which they obviously upgraded in free agency. So I think there's a lot in the way of the Cincinnati Bengals. Do I think they can make it back to the Super Bowl? Well, I'm not going to count it out because they did it with the worst offensive line in football, other than maybe the Miami Dolphins last year, and they made it to the Super Bowl. So I believe Joe Burrow has enough talent to get them back. The question is the moves that they made here, is it enough to get over the hump of this absolutely insanely loaded AFC? I'm very excited to see what the Cincinnati Bengals can do. I think it's going to be a fun season to watch them play. I think it's a fun season just to be if you're a fan of any team in the AFC West, it's going to be a show, I think, week in and week out. It's absolutely insane how much talent is there. And I think the Bengals, while I do think they have a chance of getting back, it's going to be a very, very tough road.